I guess I've been partying a little bit too much. No. I woke up at 11 o'clock this morning and I didn't even do the astrological readings that I do every Monday. Oh my God. So busy I have been reading and writing and researching about our planet Mars. Now we are talking about Mars in Cancer. Now we're going to go back to Cancer, Leo, and Virgo and discuss the placing of Mars. You know my music and my Malibu Martini. Okay, let's jump right in because we have a lot to cover with Mars in Cancer. Understand that Mars is in its fall in Cancer. It is exalted in Capricorn, and Capricorn is the opposite of Cancer. So therefore, it is in its fall. Mars doesn't work well in Cancer. Now we are going to jump into the esoteric astrology. I got a little scratch here, a little scratch. I'm going to have to put some black seed oil and some stuff. Can't have nothing going on my face now. Oh. So understand that Mars, what is Mars? Mars is the activity planet. It is the active planet. It is an action-oriented planet. Okay? So understand that Mars in Cancer will correlate with a soul that desires to create a safe, secure, personal reality in order for its evolutionary journey to be actualized. But this can be tricky with Cancer because Cancer already lives an inner life, an imaginary life that only Cancer can understand. Cancer is already on its way to another reality outside of this reality. And if truth be known, Miss Cancer or Mr. Cancer prefer to live inside that inner life and not come out if they have to. With Mars in Cancer, you would think that would bring them out of their shell. No, it doesn't. It brings them further into the shell. They will build things, create things. Mars in Cancer. How can I put this? When you have Venus in Cancer, that's the signature of the artist. The artist. With Mars there, it is the signature of the silent warrior. But there's also a lot of internal aggression and hidden anger. There's a lot of anger inside people born with Mars in Cancer. The anger is deeply rooted in psychological trauma, rooted through the mother or by the mother or through the mother experience. And if it did not happen directly through the mother or through the mother experience, then it was someone in the family, something or an element that has produced a structure in which the person has to run away from in order to feel a particular type of safety within its own matrix. Okay, I won't be surprised if young people, with Mars and Cancer, stay in their room and don't come out all day, all night unless they're called for supper. These people may be having all kinds of fears, heightened fears that they don't even know they have, that they don't understand. Fear that comes from out of the depths of the subconscious. Remember, Cancer rules the subconscious along with the 12th house Pisces, the fourth house, and Scorpio, and the eighth house. The water houses and the water signs. Cancer here is a cardinal sign. It's active water. But the waters of the ethers that represent the ethers of space, our planet, and above, inside, below, underneath, the ethers of space, which is the primordial waters that the book of Genesis talk about. And God moved upon the faces of the waters. It wasn't real water like we have the water. It was the ethers of space. So understand that in a vast universe, where is there room for safety? There's a lot of predators out there. There's a lot of predators here on the earth. Cancer always feels a certain fear-based vibration that comes out of nowhere, that strikes without warning. And there is a psychological need for the Mars in Cancer woman or man to build a structured security physically and also spiritually and psychologically. Well, the psychological is really second to spiritual. Spiritual comes much later in their lives when they learn to evolve and transcend their fears. People born with Mars in Cancer suffer a lot of anxieties. Anxieties that they don't even know how to put into words. Mars in Cancer. Okay. Another thing, what makes someone want to build a security so obsessively? Well, the answer is simple. Usually, these men and women that grew up or have Mars in Cancer grew up in a home where the parents did not provide this personal security, or it wasn't met by the parents. Something went wrong, and these people did not feel secure. If anything, they felt insecure and felt unsafe on a deep psychological level. On a deeply psychological level. So now these people don't learn how to trust easily. There's tremendous fear. Okay, so how do you transcend these powerful messages and signals from early childhood? Because the trauma most indefinitely begins in early childhood. And if it's not in early childhood, then it is deeper than that. Even going back to past lives. Understand, the Cancer is the sign and the house that deals with the immediate past life of the individual. So to have Cancer, Mars in Cancer, speaks about unfinished business. Unfinished business. Understand that this need for security extends outside of the family structure. It's like Rapunzel. She's in the tower, and the only way that you can get her is that she has to let her hair down so the man can climb. Otherwise, you ain't gonna get up that Rapunzel. That right there is typical analogy of Mars in Cancer. The ultimate fortress, the ultimate rock of Gibraltar, the ultimate Alcatraz. No one gets in, no one gets out. That is Mars in Cancer. The feelings are protected to death if necessary. Mars in Cancer. This comes from somewhere. This intense psychological need for insulation and protection outside of the family structure and outside of the family unit can happen in both ways. stem from some kind of trauma directly connected or correlated to either the mother or the moment of birth. Something happened at the moment of birth. Many medical doctors call it the incident of birth. We call it as astrologers the birth moment. The birth moment, the way that you are born, is just as important as what's in the birth chart. If your delivery of birth was complicated, that sets the tone for the complication that will be in your life based on that moment of birth. No? So Cancer rules gestation and the gestational process. Not just of each developing human being in the womb, but also outside of the womb, the different stages of emotional and psychological and psychosocial development that a human being has to go through as he comes from a baby to reaching old age and all that comes in between. These cycles and phases and gestational periods all fall under Cancer. The maternity and gestational development. So with Mars in Cancer, it won't be surprising if those developments or processes were interrupted or impeded. One way that this can happen is through sexual molestation. If you have been molested sexually as a child, that's very typical of Mars in Cancer. Remember, Mars is Aries, the god of war. So he's waging war on Cancer, either the mother or the child. And no, Aries is the sign of the rapist. So to have Mars in Cancer as a woman might be indicative that maybe at one point in her life she might have been raped or could be raped, or there might have been some kind of sexual assault that occurred too early in her gestational development for her to remember. And there's psychological anger, even rage. And this can lead to health problems and complications with fibroids and lupus and thyroidism, hypothyroidism, all kinds of different difficult to diagnose emotional diseases or disorders based on some kind of trauma that occur in early childhood. Right? Um, Let me explain a couple of examples, a couple of scenarios. Okay. Um, Emotional conflict between the parents and the child growing up watching and hearing this emotional conflict between the parents. Okay. Parents who divorce or experience a disruption with the family structure, or there's a disruption of the family structure and it's happening on an ongoing basis. uh, Both parents can be domineering emotionally, or one of them can be a wife beater, batterer. That's another way that this can be exalted. Physical abuse of the child, and of course sexual abuse. No, violent directed to the child in some way. When the emotion needs of the child are not met, displaced anger sets in. Displaced anger sets in. So now the child develops an internal anger mechanism that he doesn't understand why it's there, but he knows that it's triggered by certain engrams. L. Ron Hubbard was correct about the engrams. There are certain trigger points in our memory that can bring about to the surface certain traumas that we may have experienced when we were younger. This is definitely true of the person born with Mars in Cancer. I'm sorry that this sounds negative, but I did say that ego reaches its height of complexity as we go further up on the signs and the planets. And here, Mars, since Mars is the planet of human sexuality, and it's in its falling Cancer. The mother of all mothers, fraternity. How is this energy balanced? How can this energy be balanced? We certainly know more today about Mars and Cancer as astrologers than we did before, than many of my predecessors. So understand that if there is a total breakdown of trust in the family structure, sexual abuse and violence can also rob you of complete trust and complete dissolution of boundaries. And that can be tough. That can be tough and quite traumatic. So understand that discussing these psychological dynamics of Mars and Cancer is important because then you see a profile developing. And since Mars is a very sexual planet and Cancer is very sexual too, how does this combination work? What kind of sex goes on in the bedroom behind the woman or man with Mars and Cancer? Will it be sadomasochistic? Or will it be immature because of the sexual abuse and the physical abuse? Will the sexual organs even be adequate or appropriate for the age of the person? Because if they've been molested, then the sexual organs are probably stunted, frozen. There might be issues with sexual enjoyment, impotence. You know, all these things become important when we are looking at a relationship profile between an individual with Mars and Cancer. How will a relationship based on severe trauma can be healed, and how can it work? And how can trust be reestablished when there was a complete annihilation of it? See? So, before one can enjoy the blessings of Cancer, one has to know what those blessings are. Yeah. You have to understand that huh, how can I put this in a way? There is a philosophy that the people who are born with Mars in Cancer ultimately develop in order to protect and further insulate themselves. The problem is that they become barricaded in there, and that structured belief system that they create, which fosters a feeling of complete trust. And I mean, at least that's how it appears on the surface. But in reality, the Mars and Cancer person doesn't trust, will not trust, and will create all kinds of barriers not to allow the person, which is the object of their choice, to come in further and closer. It's almost like a form of sadomasochism that a Cancer woman or man employs or engages in when they're dealing with someone with a Gemini with a Mars in Cancer. hmm So, sexually speaking, because I know you were waiting for that part. Sexually speaking, the Mars in Cancer person will be born with fundamental fears of insecurity linked with the act of the birth itself. And that sounds kind of crazy, but the anxiety of separation from the mother, separation from the womb, is symbolized by the umbilical cord. As a result of the separation anxiety that the person with Mars in Cancer may experience at birth, the Mars in Cancer person will exhibit a deep fear of sexual vulnerability. the person with Mars in Cancer is gonna feel vulnerable and exposed, and she will be, or he will be terrified of the actual sexual experience, the actual sex act, because if it is the way that it needs to be, deeply honest, then that person, if they don't have a certain level of maturity, they're not going to be able to respond or be comfortable having sex because they're going to feel exposed and vulnerable. Kind of like a child that's left unattended after the water breaks and it comes out of the womb. Can you imagine that? That's deep. That's deep. So, having said that, the person with Mars in Cancer may not really throw themselves easily into the enjoyments of sex. Sex grows over time, or they develop sex over time through maturity. There can be sexual immaturity in the sex act. Kind of like a teenager having sex for the first time. They know nothing about multiple orgasms, vaginal orgasm, or clitoral orgasm. Or they might know about clitoral orgasm but not vaginal. Or they might have vaginal orgasm but not clitoral. Or they might not have neither. And sexual enjoyment occurs when the Mars in Cancer person is much older, understands his or her whole body better, and has done the work, the personal work, emotional work, to transcend these blockages and these fears that may be causing sexual inhibition with the person born with Mars in Cancer. Like Leo, there may be. It's good. It's good. There might be an oral fixation, just like in Leo, where oral sex becomes the mode of having sex versus having vaginal sex, because again, fear of vulnerability. But oral sex can be just as vulnerable as vaginal sex or intercourse, you know. But understand that the sucking action of the nipples or even of the clitoris, is and if it's done too rough or too hard, or if the man or the woman spends too much time down there, oral sex, and makes that the preferred method of having sex, then that also speaks of a certain level of sexual immaturity. And psychiatrists, especially sexologists, call it the frozen zone, or the genitals become frozen because of sexual abuse, which leads to emotional abuse or emotional trauma. Because it doesn't have to be sexual abuse, but it can work symbiotically. Again, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can look at this. As a result, though, the Mars in Cancer can be sexually and or emotionally possessive, domineering, and irrationally jealous. See, it can flip and go the other way. Okay? Hypocritically speaking, they can demand that their partner be absolutely faithful while at the same time giving themselves the right to have sex with someone else. Oh yeah, they can flip it. They can flip it. And again, that has a lot to do, again, going back to the root of the birth moment and the psychological separation from the mother. Oh, this is deep, folks. I'm telling you, the ego and the personality reaches a certain level and height of complexity that has to be explained carefully. And we're done with part one.